Hey, today I want to talk about the Odin because I think that there is a massive discourse around the Odin currently with Brawk winning MVP. I think this discussion is warranted, but I also am on the fence on whether actually the Odin deserves a nerf or not. Just how nerfed it really should be if it does receive one. So I do kind of have like three things that potentially could be the way that it gets nerfed by Riot, but I'm unsure on whether it even deserves a nerf. So the reason why I don't think it really needs a nerf is because Brawk is an outlier in the way that he uses it. And obviously, he'll use it to great effect. And there's not many players that actually achieve that level of success with the Odin. And the reason for that is because the way that he tends to play it tends to be, first of all, he's very researched in the way that you can. I think I've heard them talk about the way that he was researching people's pathings going into sites and things like that just so he could spam them correctly. And obviously that kind of stuff we don't really have access to outside of pro play anyway. So in terms of like solo queue, there is like a most pathed way into site, I guess you could argue, but at the same time, like it's not going to be as specific as what Brawk was managing to do. Also, things like comp and all that kind of stuff can change the way that the Odin plays in certain rounds and in certain games overall. So I think that that is very much a thing that works against it in solo queue. So I also don't think, so I just don't think that the Odin can really work in a solo queue environment as well as what Brawk was achieving. And as a result, I don't think it really needs a nerf, at least directed at solo queue. You can maybe argue one for pro play, because you imagine the cascading effect of this is that people are going to learn the way that Brawk had used it, and then we're going to start seeing more of some sort of Odin meta moving forward. And I think that is where the argument lies for the Odin nerfs, is that it could just be an Odin meta. But for me, I actually see the Odin as like a good option, right? It's an option very similar to me as the operator, where you're kind of saving for that gun to then be used in rounds that are very important. You're essentially going to be saving for that gun, so then you have the effectiveness of that gun within a round, right? You have the niche that it provides, or the gunpowder that, like the power of the weapon that it provides. And I think that the problem currently with the Odin is that it's attainable too easily. I think that you would see Brawk actually buy it on the second round sometimes. Honestly, thankfully, like thanks really to his like either like someone getting a multi-frag. Sometimes I've actually seen Scuba buy it for him on the second round. So things like that are really, really detrimental to what I think the balance of the Odin should be. So this is kind of like one of the main nerfs I think we will see if we do see a nerf, which I think we will. I think we're going to see the price go up to about 35k, 3.5k. Because I think 3.5k is a pretty good point where it's not too expensive, but it's not so similar to the rifles. And I think that the balance of the gun can stay the same at 3.5k. I don't think you really want to be messing around with anything else there. The other things that they could look to nerf are the mag size and the reserve ammo. So I would say 75 to 150. Currently it's 100 to 200. So there's 300 total bullets there, but I think it should be 225 total bullets with 75 maximum in one mag. I think that makes a lot more sense. It gives the Odin a lot less uptime, so it's a lot easier to kind of take those fights against the Odin because you can essentially wear the Odin out a lot easier. I also think as well, it adds a lot more skill to the Odin player slightly. But I say a lot more skill. It adds a slightly more skill to the Odin player in like when you're actually choosing to spam and that kind of stuff, right? So it can be very similar to the reserve ammo nerfs we saw a long time ago. And the third one for the Odin, which I think is very much more linked to the way that Brawk specifically played, which is movement speed. I think that you can actually probably nerf the movement speed on the Odin a tiny bit to make it. And the reason for this is to make it so when the Odin is being more proactive, because a lot of the time when people use the Odin, they then force the enemy team to then counter use the Odin in some ways, where they will try and counter spam essentially. And the worst part, the thing is with counter spam is that it's reactive. And the original Odin user is still going to be more active, especially with Brawk, where he was much more used to using the Odin than anyone else. He would be a lot more active in the way that he would use it. So therefore, he would catch a lot of enemies off guard and then be able to have the luxury of repositioning and not actually taking the damage in response. So I think a lot of his play might actually influence a kind of movement speed nerf to the Odin, because he was allowed to kind of maneuver his way around the spam. and be a lot more proactive because of the advantage he has of actually using the Odin. And obviously that might diminish over time as people start to use it more and more. Like people might get better at just having their own lines to then counter the Odin preemptively and have a lot more proactive play that they can actually use. That a lot of people didn't have at this tournament versus Brawk. So I could see a movement speed nerf potentially, but I think that one's the least likely and probably going to be the least effective overall anyway. I think it's a lot more niche in the way that it would actually affect the game. But I do think that the price nerfs and reserve ammo kind of nerfs, these will be quite good things to see for just the balance around pro play for the Odin. I'm not exactly sure if it needs it though, to be honest. Because it's only Brawk that has ever been good with the Odin, realistically. To this level, at least. And I think that it takes a level of skill to be this good with the Odin, right? As I already mentioned, things with like the knowledge of when and where to spam, and how to spam that, and like how to position to not get spammed back when he was actually against Odins and that kind of thing. Like he was really smart about how he played. So to nerf it because of how smart he was, like I'm not sure if it even does warrant the nerf, just because of how much research and skill it would have taken still to then beat these caliber of players with the Odin. Honestly, it looked very oppressive the way he did it, and he was playing very well. He was on form this tournament anyway. Some of the kills he got with the Phantom were really good and really impactful. So he was already playing well to begin with as well, which I don't think he's going to get much credit for, which is kind of unfortunate because I think that he did play well at this tournament even without the Odin. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Odin. I do think we're going to see a change. I just don't know if the change is really that warranted. We might see more safe changes, and I think a safe change would be the price going up, just so it stays out of those second round buys. I think that would be one of the safest ways to nerf the Odin currently. And then as time goes on, if we get because obviously the regular season doesn't start again until January, so it might be that we might see more nerfs by then. Like we might see some smaller tournaments or some other tournaments go on, and then we see the Odin in those ones, and it still looks oppressive on 3.5k or whatever. So and then they might get nerfed again. But I imagine that we are going to see a price difference in the Odin. I think that's the most likely thing. If you want to go more extreme, we could potentially see nerfs to all the maps, and also nerfs, but like changes to all the maps that make them overall less spammable. But I think that would change the game a bit too much. So, especially because the Odin is high penetration, so when you make things less penetrable, then it's going to affect the Vandal and the Phantom more on a lot of these situations than it's going to affect the Odin, especially because of the frequency of the purchasing of Vandal and Phantom versus the Odin anyway. Just out of price point, but also out of just general play. Everyone prefers to use the Vandal or the Phantom generally. So if you nerf all the maps, or if you change all the maps and change the spammability of all the walls, then it's going to affect the general play more than it's going to affect the Odin. So when people suggest changing the maps, they're essentially changing a lot more than what the Odin is actually doing in this tournament. So for me, I don't think changing the maps is a very viable option, especially because of the time-consuming amount on Riot's end to then do all those changes and do them in a more balanced way. We already talked about maps not being very balanced, and is not always going to be more balanced when you can't spam through things. There are things that, like some spams, that actually make the game more balanced. So it is important to realize that this is a too much of a wide scale change to accurately pinpoint the strength of the Odin, if that makes sense. So I don't think we would see map changes. We might see some very small amounts, but I don't think we're going to see map-wide changes from a lot of the maps, if there's going to be any at all. I guess that's it. I think the Odin is probably going to get nerfed, but I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments, whether it is going to get nerfed or not, and what you guys think is actually going to change with the Odin. If you want to see more content like this, then subscribe. It really helps me out a lot, and I will see you in my next one.